Good morning all, and welcome to this Business Breakfast Thinking. My name's James Harding. I'm the editor and co-founder of Tortoise, and almost exactly a year ago we started working with the CBI. We were doing regular morning calls with the CBI, and on the very first one, I have to confess, I was extremely nervous. There were hundreds of businesses. It was just at the beginning of the pandemic. There was great anxiety, and I blundered in and confidently welcomed everyone to the CBI call and said, I'm delighted that I'm joined by Dame Carolyn McCall. And there was an awkward look on the other end of the phone, or the screen in this case, where Dame Carolyn Fairburn said, no, actually, it's Carolyn Fairburn. And so I'm particularly pleased, Carolyn, this morning, to be able to say we're joined by Dame Carolyn McCall, and I've got it right this time. So thank you, Carolyn, for joining us. Carolyn, the aim of what we're trying to do in the course of the next hour is something that I've always found quite hard to find in the media, i.e. an amount of time, a really decent length of time, to try and understand the choices that a senior person in business faces, and try and understand the full range of what it is to be a chief executive, and try to understand the industry you work in. Of course, the truth is with you, given the fact that you've run The Guardian, you've run the easyJet and ITV, we could run into a whole range of industries. And I hope over the course of the hour we'll get a chance to do that. Many people will be regulars of our thinkings and know it's intended to be like an open news meeting. So not dissimilar from The Guardian, a sort of open editorial board. I hope everyone will weigh in with thoughts. My colleague Liz Mosley is here, and she will marshal the chat and bring people in. But please do weigh in with your thoughts and observations on business more generally, on the businesses that Carolyn has run, and of course on ITV. Carolyn, can I start by asking a non-business question? You know, but even before you got into business, before you'd kind of started your working life, you'd had quite a, peripatetic childhood. You'd moved around quite a bit. And I just wondered what you think you brought from your upbringing, from that childhood to your working life. What were the formative elements of it?
Well, I look back on that childhood as a kind of, I felt very lucky because I had, my parents were working abroad, and so I was working with them. So I was born and brought up in India, but I have links that go deeper with India than that. So I felt very lucky because I spent time with my grandmother, who also lived in India. So, I went to a boarding school that I think I never felt that I was being left behind by my parents. I felt I enjoyed it. I was an only child. I enjoyed it. I was very independent. I think it makes you independent and makes you an independent thinker in some ways. It also makes you actually really value relationships. You really need your mates at boarding school and when you live abroad, because many of them move on quite quickly, and so you have to make a real effort to keep in touch with people. And so, I felt, my childhood was probably good preparation for me in a way, because it made me very adaptable.
And tell us, I want to talk, most of this morning about ITV and the future of television and broadcasting, but there are very few people I can think of, Carolyn, who've run not just three big businesses, but three such different businesses. And it feels to me as though at the moment, there's much more of a fashion for CEOs who are born and bred in a particular industry and stay in it. It's much less normal to move around. How different are the cultures of The Guardian, easyJet, and ITV?
Well, I mean, I think The Guardian and ITV probably have much more similarity in terms of culture. That's just, that's there. That isn't, it's there. It's creative culture. It's kind of the ethos, the values. When I got to easyJet, I felt that the values of easyJet had to be articulated and really brought out. And I was lucky I had a chairman in Mike Brake who was very supportive of me doing that. And I'll give you just one example of what I mean by that. The Guardian, you didn't have to really discuss the values. They would just come, they were just there. They were in C.P. Scott's kind of book. They were talked about, but lived very clearly. And so whether you like or hate The Guardian, it's kind of almost irrelevant. It's just that people do know it has integrity. It has freedom of speech. It never interferes with its journalism. It's a caring organization and meritocratic. At easyJet, when I got there were a lot of the co-pilots were on temporary contracts, and this is quite a big deal in the aviation industry. You know, there was a lot of talk about that, particularly from the pilots and the pilot union. And I remember it took me a couple of months actually to really understand this whole structure of work in a way. And I'd been around all the bases, including those in Europe, and it was making me very uncomfortable. You had people sitting in the right-hand seat, pilots, co-pilots, who were thinking about where they could work because they didn't have a permanent contract. You know, constantly thinking, well, if Monarch comes up, I'll jump there, I'll go there because I want a permanent contract. I went, and I was being told it was going to cost millions and millions of pounds to make all of the co-pilots permanent. And I went to Mike and I said, I'm very uncomfortable with this. It doesn't sit well with my values. And I think I really want to do something about it. And he said, you're right, go ahead. You know, go and find out what you can do, bring it to the board. And that's how actually we started to have, we had a structure for how it could move to permanent contracts after a short period of time of training, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, you know, for me at easyJet, what was brilliant is that I was with a team of people, I was able to kind of articulate values and purpose, because the purpose of easyJet was clear from its founding, but it had never really been really articulated and communicated, most importantly actually to its customers as well as to the people within it. And along with purpose goes values, as you well know. So that was a brilliant opportunity. It was also brilliant when you saw it all coming together, when everyone believed it, they all contributed to it, they all believed it. There was a customer charter, there was, you know, it was an amazingly powerful thing to see happening because everyone was involved. It wasn't just me saying, I think we should do this and I think we should do that. It was a team effort. And, you know, from cabin crew to pilots, from ground ops to people in the hangar, you know, ops control, it was just brilliantly endorsed and felt.
And Carolyn, before we get to TV, one of the things that also happened at easyJet was it became, or the business was inevitably politicized. It was politicized around climate. It was politicized, as you say, around working conditions. It was also politicized around Brexit. And I wondered how you thought about, or your experience of that, being someone who runs a business with an eye to the business and also thinking, actually, I've got to take some political stands here.
Well, I think, you know, on the climate side, we were very, very, I mean, easyJet was ahead in terms of talking about climate change and being an active participant in change for good for climate change. So climate action, if you like, rather than just, you know, talking about climate change. And the reason for that was its model is actually of aviation, the least carbon hungry, put it that way. So it's short haul flying only. It's a low cost model, which means high load factor. That means, you know, when you're complaining about how many people are on the plane, that's actually very good for fuel. It's very good for carbon. We put in lightweight trolleys, lightweight carpets, lightweight seats, everything. We took off. No newspapers on board, I'm afraid. No magazines on board to be sold. No, you know, we manage the weight of baggage. You know, all of that makes a massive difference to fuel burn. And actually, most importantly, we worked with Airbus and ensured we had the newest planes with the newest engine, which burn, you know, 15 to 20% less fuel, and could afford to do that. So I think on the climate side, you know, we were also trialing. We were working with people on aviation fuel, which was going to be green. So we well ahead. We were doing things like that. So I think on that, and we articulated that, and we actually published that. So we would respond, and we worked with lots of industry bodies on that whole area. And I'm not saying anybody is perfect in the aviation industry, but I think one of the things that's very important is that they are trying, because it is in their vested interest to ensure that they can be as green as possible and they can contribute to sustainable aviation fuel in the future, which is a big thing. I think on Brexit was definitely a very difficult moment for easyJet, because easyJet was born from deregulation. That's how it came into being. Stelios saw the opportunity of deregulation to set up an airline and get a license, and flew a plane from, you know, like point to point. Basically, it was he based it on, you know, Southwest Airlines, but that could never have happened had it all been tightly regulated as it had been in the past. It was as a result of deregulation. So half the employees in Luton, for instance, were non-British. They were European predominantly. So, you know, lots of fear and anxiety, and what is the model and how does the model change? And so, you know, the board was clear that we needed to speak up and say as a business that this was why this was not good for a British airline, and easyJet is a British airline. You know, I mean, people forget that Ryanair is Irish, so it's EU, and actually BA is IAG is Spanish, so they didn't have the same issues as easyJet.
And Karen, just tell me about. I'm intrigued about that experience, because one of the complaints about British business leaders has been, well, actually, one of the complaints cuts both ways. Either where the British business leaders advocating their point of view on the future, i.e., they're too reticent on politics, or it's the argument which is, butt out. You're not elected politician and shouldn't be speaking on political issues. So how did it play out?
Well, I kind of agree with the latter. I mean, I think you're not an elected politician, and you're not there to give your personal opinion about politics when you're in your working life. You have a platform in that life, that working life, because of your position. So I think I'm of the view that you do have to speak up and be brave sometimes about what implications there are of political decisions on your business or your sector, or business generally. I would never have spoken about Brexit in a personal capacity. I don't think anyone would know what my views are on Brexit. I don't think so. I mean, I spoke as a leader of a European airline, but a British airline based in Britain, which creates thousands and thousands of jobs. So I feel it's sometimes quite difficult for business leaders to speak up, because they get attacked, either because they're accused of, you know, using it as a personal pulpit, or because, you know, they're not agreed with, you know, and everyone has a right to disagree with a position, but you can get some really very nasty, coverage or emails. I mean, you know, pretty awful. So I think it can be difficult, but I think it is important that when you are representing your business, you speak up about matters that relate to your business, and you have to be open and brave about those. Sometimes they're not always going to be popular.
Well, I was interested in that, because in the course of the conversation, I'm really interested, I'm sure lots of people will weigh in on the sort of cultural responsibility and the role of ITV in that. Let's turn to this. Firstly, let's address the big subject. It's already arisen in the chat, so we need to address it. The first subject when we discuss ITV is Love Island.
Is it? Sadly, not news then. Not news, which is a cornerstone of what we do.
No, but I'm responsive to the questions and thoughts and the concerns, I should say, Carolyn, in the chat. So what's going to happen
with Love Island?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it will come back in the summer. We couldn't film it last summer because we just couldn't get to Spain and film it. So, and it all, you know, as you remember, I mean, COVID was quite early days. You start planning and, you know, pre-planning and post-production, pre-production, you do that quite a number of months in advance. So we hope Love Island will be back this year, and you know, where it is, I don't know yet. But it's a big show. It's, you know, as many, you know, the thing I think that is really important, I know what the concern is, and I will address it. And I'm glad people are asking the question, because I'd rather discuss it. You know, the British public have always been on reality shows and game shows since the 50s, since TV ever started. That this, you know, it is something that really works in Britain. British people want it. They want to see themselves on screen. They want to participate on screen, and they want to see people they know on screen. So that's important. But the most important thing, if you're going to have anybody participating in a show, is duty of care. Yeah. And we have put, and certainly since I've been at ITV and previously, I mean, every broadcaster and producer actually takes duty of care seriously. It is not in anyone's interest to not do that well and properly, and to invest in that properly. The thing that struck me when I joined ITV is how so much had changed in the last 5 years. I've been at ITV 3 years, in the last 5 years, the growth of social media and the way people behave on social media has changed exponentially. It's a kind of cauldron, if you like, of either praise and adulation or absolute opprobrium. I mean, just really horrible stuff. And so if you're going on a show like that, that accentuates and highlights and makes your experience a different one to one that it would have been 5-10 years ago. Certainly 10 years ago, social media didn't even exist really in the way it was today.
And I think let's talk about that, the social media interaction, in a moment. But just on Love Island, so we've actually got it clear. Presumably, the announcement from the Prime Minister last night means that Love Island goes ahead this summer.
We would aim for Love Island to go ahead this summer. Where it will go ahead, I'm not sure yet, because he's not. The Prime Minister didn't lay out any plan for international travel. He will do that later.
The implications are, Karen, aren't they, that the world is able to go back to travel from June the 21st because all restrictions are lifted. So, and I don't know what the timetable is on your filming over the summer and then release.
Well, we've got the Euros, which we're delighted about. So we've got the Euros in June,
right?
And so Love Island schedule will fit around that. So, but it won't be. We still won't. I mean, that won't be enough time for us to do it where we would normally do it in Spain.
Oh, I see.
You know, we'll work it out. The one thing about our production team is that they're very innovative. They're very creative.
So can I get to the sort of fundamental question for television of the broadcasters? And everyone will have seen, Karen, the numbers in terms of viewing figures for ITV over the course of the last year. They've been extraordinary. The question I suppose many people will have is whether or not the pandemic has been short-term amazing for terrestrial broadcasters like ITV, and long-term catastrophic, as in the switch to streaming and the change of habits, both around streaming and around television advertising, turn out to be irreversible, and that really fundamentally damages the model of ITV.
So this is the big strategic question, and this is what our entire strategy is based on, because actually these trends are trends that have existed, I would say, for the last 8 years, not just the last 3 years. I think that the shift towards different ways of viewing is what we're talking about. And we are only talking about viewing because, in terms of, we can come back to the pandemic and how we dealt with the closure of production in March and April and the actual collapse of the advertising market. We are an advertising funded business. I think that's very important to remember. One of the reasons we do so much and big audiences are so important is because advertisers really value them. So go back to the structural shift in viewing, and there is a shift. The thing that is forgotten is that I think a lot of people ask me about the comparison between print and TV, and you are come from a print background as well. In print, we didn't do video. We had fantastically well-resourced journalism. But it was all paper-based, and you could take that and you could make it a bit different and put it online, but you didn't have video. And video is a skill, and it's an expensive business to be in. TV is video. There's no difference. It's just how you watch it. It's just big screen, small screen, laptop, iPad, mobile. I think we're in a strong position, but we have to change. So the whole More Than TV strategy is saying we will always have a strong linear channel or channels, but we will also have a very strong hub so that you can watch on demand, or you can watch when you're mobile, you can watch when you are moving around, you can watch on your laptop, your iPad, whatever you want, your mobile. So it's giving people the brilliant content that we produce, and we do produce some amazing content that viewers want to watch of all generations, wherever they want, whenever they want, however they choose to watch it on whatever device. And that's a big shift. But we're making it. We've invested a lot of money in technology, in data, in analytics. I mean, when I got to ITV, honestly, there was not one person who did AI. We didn't have one person who understood AI or implemented it. We now have a team of people that are data scientists. That's what they do, and they help. Now, data is only important because of the insights you get about your viewers. To your point, understanding what they're doing, where they're going, how they're viewing, and what they're viewing is critical. And that's what the strategy is based on. So we've got Hub, where we're investing a lot. We have then, with the other PSBs, got our own streaming business, which is the national streaming business. It's where you find all of British content, multi-series box sets from way, way past, current, and actually with some originals. So the recent past, the way past are archive contents. You can see series 1 to whatever of virtually all of the British content that is produced by ITV, BBC, Channel 4, Channel 5. That's a big thing, BritBox, in that regard, because it is trying to be, it's not trying to be the global streaming services. So, you know, our strategy is based on mitigating that shift, ensuring that we take the opportunity of that shift rather than just simply see it as a threat. Of course, it's a threat, because if you, as a viewer, you now have the choice that you've never had. You've got this proliferation of actually very good content in every genre, and we're competing with that.
And can I put to you that there are potentially 3 threats, right? So there's the threat of streaming, which is not just the means of reaching people, but it's who has control. It's that the bigger platforms, the Netflix and the Disney Pluses and the Primes, have such control because they are the distributors in a way that for years ITV has been. Yep. Secondly, that in the process, the value of TV advertising structurally changes, that it definitely falls. And third, that even the production business, where, as you say, ITV has got this great heritage of producing so much, but it produces for a different model. It produces for volume, so it produces at a lower budget, and this can't necessarily compete with these blockbuster shows and still provide enough television for the channel itself. So I just wonder how you see all of those 3.
I didn't answer those 3. I would have brought those in, but I thought the answer would have been way too long. So I was talking about viewing, but clearly, I think the most serious thing really is that, as you say, and I think a lot of people have not really got this yet. And, you know, what we are trying to say to government repeatedly and urgently is that TV distribution will be via IP, will be via the internet, and probably within a decade. So not that long to go. Now, that we will always keep DTT, which is the linear feed. It has been proven to be very resilient in times like a pandemic, for instance, okay, where if you had only relied on IP, you could have got a huge amount of misinformation. I mean, the government relied on linear TV to communicate accurately and inform the nation. So, but the majority is going to shift to IP. That means that distribution is totally controlled, as you say, via global tech companies who can charge what they want for prominence. So where you appear on their screen, they can exclude you if they don't want you on there, which no one can do that in the linear world. And effectively what we've got is a 2003 Broadcasting Act, which is for an analog world. And we all know we are in a digital world, and what the pandemic has done is accelerate digital. So it is completely out of date, and we are saying it has to be modernized so that the benefits that public service broadcasting brings the country, and the public totally recognizes this because Ofcom did a load of research on this, which is cultural, which is democratic, i.e. you know you're getting trusted, accurate information, which is societal, which is it is British content for British people, about British people, right? It does things that it will take very difficult subjects like homophobia, like what's it like to be a Muslim in a predominantly white area in Manchester, for instance. The soap to tackle that, there's just, grooming. Emmerdale and Corrie, and indeed other soaps have tackled very difficult things through storylines. That's about our society. It's about trying to reflect, but also shape society. And of course, there's economic benefits to being a PSB. So we're saying, 112 trillion in the sector. It's huge. It's a massive sector. So I think that, we've been conveying that. I don't think anyone now has to be talking about why PSBs are important. We're saying to government, you have to act now to ensure that thrives, that continues to thrive, because otherwise the global tech players will dominate, and they are monopolies. And we know that that is quite bad, and that will be bad for Britain. So So that I agree with you. So we are working with Ofcom. Ofcom, I think, gets it. They've shown in their report that they see this as urgent, and government has to now legislate. So that's your point. We completely agree with that.
Can I ask you, well, firstly, for people who've got up early this morning and are not entirely across public service broadcasting, I should say, when I joined the BBC, Carolyn, I remember thinking, this is slightly embarrassing. I'm not sure I entirely understand what public service broadcasting it is, but is the idea, isn't it, that those terrestrial broadcasters like ITV, like Channel 4, like the BBC, are required to produce a certain amount of content. There are obligations in terms of news and weather and information, and also locally made content and a range of content. Given what you're saying about public service,
you have quotas, so you have to produce a lot of that out of London. So it's this thing about regeneration of the whole country. So you can't just produce stuff in London, which is is easier because a lot of people are based in London in those industries. So you've got out of London. You have to do it for public good. You're regulated. We are regulated. I mean, Google, Facebook, and everybody else is not regulated for the content that they carry.
But you are. So my question, Carolyn, I understand that those platforms, those streaming services, Netflix, Amazon, Disney Plus, that they're not public service, right? They don't have that accountability. They don't have that regulatory requirement. And I understand when you say Ofcom gets it, they appreciate the problem. What I don't understand is what the answer is. Are you saying, what's the next version? What should be required? Yeah.
They have to legislate to have prominence. That means the public service broadcasters, if you look at your EPG, your electronic program guide on Sky, the listing, not the tiles, you will see that all of the PSBs have got prominence. That means they have to be carried in the top X of the listing, right? In the digital world, you don't have to be carried at all. So you don't have to be included. It hasn't happened with Amazon, but say they didn't want the BBC or ITV on Amazon, they wouldn't have to have it. And they certainly wouldn't they also don't have to put it in a prominent position. So they can sell tiles to the highest bidder. If you're a PSB, you can never afford to bid against a Netflix, for instance, for the top tile. So, or one of the top tiles, or even on the first screen. If you're a manufacturer, Samsung, LG, you can do what you want with your front screen. So you plug your TV in and a whole load of tiles will come up. And the PSBs don't have to be on that. They're not prominent. They don't have to be included.
Right.
So they have to legislate that happens in the digital world. And the third point really is about fair value, because part of the quid pro quo with PSBs for getting this prominence is that we give the content of ITV1 and BBC1 for free to the platforms that carry us, right? So but there has to be a fair value, a fair exchange of value for that. And in the digital world, you can find yourself in a negotiation which is about taking away half or a third or a quarter of your ad revenue or your subscription revenue, or so there's no legislation, there's no framework for how you would do this. So that's what has to happen.
And Carolyn, is that, even if that's the case, is that enough? So if you take the Sky experience as a precedent, the BBC, ITV battled for years about prominence on the EPG and keeping high up the list on the Sky menu of channels. Was it enough, or did you see over time the bleed of audiences away from the public service broadcasters and onto those other Sky channels?
No, quite the reverse. If you talk to Sky or Virgin, you talk actually to anyone who's got the PSBs on there, the PSBs attract audience. They want the PSBs on there. So quite the reverse. There's no bleed of audiences. We're very popular. Our dramas, our entertainment shows, and I'm talking about all PSBs here. Yes. Our quiz shows, our reality shows are all very, very popular on platforms. And then,
sorry, Carolyn, because I'm concerned, for example, about local news, right? My concern is not only if you move to a world where you're watching mostly Netflix, you get no news. But then over time, you'll see a world in which there's just very little local news because most of the local news is provided now by television. Yeah. What requirement would there be to carry that on a streamer like Netflix?
There's no requirement to do that. And we're not asking that for that to happen, Netflix is a streaming service, it's an entertainment streaming service, but the PSBs have got a duty to do regional and local news. And I would say, this is why I was partly joking, but you know, one of the cornerstones of what we do is our regional news. It's extremely strong. We spend over £70 million a year producing. It's very expensive doing news, as you know. It's got to be done well. It's got to be well resourced. It's got to train up. It's got to, you know, it's a really intensive business, and we do it well. And if you talk to the regions, if you talk to people in communities, they will say ITV regional news is really important to them because it covers issues in their areas that no national news can ever touch. So it's a very important community service, actually. And, you know, I think what ITV do is we work with people, and we don't patronize, but we do cover the things that people really want to investigate or want to know more about. So I think and we have to, and we want to do it, but we have to do it as part of our license. That's one of the things to protect, actually. That is an important thing.
And the competition between local news, between the BBCs and ITVs, was really important. But I just want to understand, Carolyn, so what you're saying is, in your ideal world, Ofcom steps in, frames a piece of legislation.
No, the government steps in. The government steps in. The government has to legislate. Yeah.
So the government steps in, frames the legislation that requires the prominence of ITV, BBC, etc., on all of these streaming services. So
prominent inclusion and a framework for fair value, so that there's a fair exchange of value, so that, you know, the terms that are set are fair for what you're giving.
Right. And
what things are important.
And when you speak to Disney or Netflix or Amazon, what do they say to this suggestion?
So this is not about Disney and Netflix, because they are streaming services. This is more about platforms that distribute content, aggregate content, or distribute content. So it is Apple, it is Amazon, it actually is Sky and Virgin, because they all have big IP products and plans for the future. It is how we work with them. And the 2003 Broadcasting Act, you know, look, in 2003, I say this and people barely believe it, but Facebook didn't even exist. It's called something else, you know.
So I just don't understand. So you're saying this sorts out the tiles on the Samsung TV. It sorts out,
as well as on Amazon, as well as on Apple, as well as on Sky, as well.
But it doesn't touch. It doesn't touch Disney. It doesn't touch Discovery. It doesn't touch Netflix.
Only Discovery, as in if they were aggregating content. So Discovery only if they become more of a platform. This is about global platforms, tech platforms.
And you don't consider Netflix in that category?
Well, not yet. No, Netflix are a streaming service. They only do Netflix. Now, they're not regulated, and that's not what we're discussing. We're talking legislation about a framework for public service broadcasters to continue to have prominence in the digital world, to have inclusion, to be included. So no one can say we're not having this, we're just having that. And to have a fair exchange of value, as I keep saying, which is how we negotiate. There has to be a framework that says you can't just chuck them out.
I want to make sure. Let's start bringing some of the people in who sort of asking some questions about this. I see Colin Duffy's
second 2 points, which were really important. If you don't mind.
Advertising.
Just very briefly on advertising before we go further. You know, we obviously know that personalized targeted advertising is going to be another part of advertisers, marketeers' armory. And hence, 2 years ago, we have invested in an advertising tech platform, which allows us to do targeted advertising on Hub. So we are able to offer mass audiences, trusted audiences on linear, on ITV1, ITV2, but also we're able to target advertising on. So that is a platform, and it's operating now. It's been rolled out to all the agencies. It's been very well received. And your final thing was about your production business is fine, but you can't really do what you know, this volume stuff. That is not at all correct, James, I'm afraid. So I'm going to just say, actually, ITV Studios is a business which serves many other customers other than ITV. So in the States, it makes Queer Eye for Netflix, it makes Snowpiercer, it makes Cowboy Bebop, it makes a huge number of shows. You know, a lot of our formats are now available in multiple countries, Love Island in 20, I'm a Celebrity in 16, etc., etc. But we produce content through production companies that are bought by many, many broadcasters and OTTs, actually.
And is there not, Carolyn, a tension between producing for linear television and producing for, big ticket streamers? No, there's not?
None.
Okay.
None.
Okay.
Because we have 55 production labels within ITV Studios, all of whom excel in different genres or in different, so we have scripted labels like Mammoth, and World, who do Bodyguard, who do Vanity Fair, who do a whole range of things. We have unscripted labels who do a completely different thing. So no, I mean, our production business is one of the best ways of diversifying from ad revenue, as is our subscription business, which is BritBox and Hub Plus, which is BritBox internationally is doing very well. That's a subscription business that's also diversifying away from ad revenue. So we have various pillars of profit rather than just one.
So, Carolyn, forgive me, and for everyone who's joined us this morning, forgive me because we got into the weeds and I haven't had a chance to bring nearly enough people. But Colin Lawrence is asking an interesting question, also just about the ecology of broadcasting. Colin, I wonder whether you wanted to make the point, because I realised you also, we haven't even touched on Channel 4 yet. Go ahead. Let me just double check you're unmuted. I'm
unmuted.
Yes. There you are.
And James, if I knew you were going to ask me a question, I would have probably done my hair a bit differently. But it was just what if you followed the debates in Parliament after the Ofcom research, which was the small screen big debate, which Carolyn referred to, which was a really terrific piece of work. It very specifically called out the value of public service broadcast, but it did refer to the mixed economy, so license fee funding for the BBC, not-for-profit for Channel 4, and obviously for-profit for ITV and Channel 5. But I think it said something really clearly, which is that how successful that has been in creating the ecosystem which we enjoy now for the creative industries in the UK, the investment and innovation that mixed model has had. And there is an absolute threat from the streaming services to the financial viability. That there's a few questions around about Channel 4's future sustainability with an ad-funded model. And these are kind of, if you like, these have been second-tier arguments, but really they should be at the top of the tree. And the government has been incredibly slow in responding to that. But the Ofcom data and the parliamentary subcommittees that were streamed, I think, in October and November last year were really insightful.
Colin, thank you.
I agree with you.
And Carolyn, what do you think is, just on the point about how slow the government is, there is an argument which is that the government this particular government is quite actively hostile to Channel 4, has really mixed emotions around the BBC and doesn't really care sufficiently about ITV. And so the combination of those things is there's not a real engagement with the future of British television. Do you think that's fair?
I don't look, I mean, I think the government has got its hands full, and that goes without saying. I think they have so much legislation to do because of Brexit, and there's going to be stuff queuing up to be legislated on. What I would say is it is absolutely critical, and I say this in every place I can in government, that they grasp this now and they act with urgency. To Colin's point, Ofcom are clear. It says, if you don't do this, the dangers are that what happened with local newspapers, and James, what happened, and many people on this will know, I worked in local newspapers. GMG owns some of the biggest and best local newspapers in Britain, the Manchester Evening News included. And it was horrible to see the effect of global tech businesses on local news. It was just, you could see it unfolding and there was nothing being done. And even though this might be, it's not exactly the same, the underlying issues of what government can do to ensure a thriving PSB ecology. And just think about this, we spent about £4 billion between us, Channel 4, BBC and us, and Channel 5 on programming, the majority of which is in Britain. It goes into Britain, thousands of jobs, many of them in Leeds, Manchester, well away from London. It is so important to all of the things I mentioned: cultural, economic, democratic, societal, and yet, and we've actually actually given a lot of guidance as to how to act, right, on this Broadcasting Act. So I don't know. I just don't know why they won't act. And I'm hopeful that they will. I'm told by DCMS that, the DCMS are sitting, there's a panel, we've encouraged them to come out in the autumn, not at the end of the year when we think that might be too late. And they will then say what they think, and then the government will have to say something. Yeah. So yes, I mean, I'm hopeful that the government will listen and act.
Yeah. Well, well, you can hear in your voice the sort of frustration at the point that Colin's making about how slow it's been. And just to echo your point, Karen, I see Anthony Copes made the point in the chat, regional programs are going to be vital to national cohesion. Local newspapers have been sacrificed. We can't let that happen to local TV news too.
I agree. I think what we do, I've said this before, I mean, regional news is one of the absolute most critical things ITV does for this country. And I hope I know we do it well, and I hope people on this call, on this Zoom thing, we do it well, because we take it so seriously.
Can I ask you, a couple of people have asked about this digital transformation. I'm going to bring in Debbie Mason, who's got a point about that, and a couple of others. So I want to talk about that and your point about AI. But I just want to go back to a subject we touched on. When you talked about Brexit and the responsibility of businesses businesses and business leaders to speak on issues of their values. With television, you've got a double responsibility, don't you? You've got a responsibility to the business, and then the business itself speaks. And so I wondered, in the big cultural conversations that we're having in the UK at the moment around Black Lives Matter, around the whole expression of identity, how does that play for ITV? And also, how much opposition do you find either within the business or within the audience to when ITV chooses to make a stand on any of those issues?
So I don't see it as making a stand. I mean, I think that, of course, editorially, they might run campaigns, about issues. And we collaborate very well in ITV, commercially and editorially, but there is church and state in terms of editorial independence, right? That's very important. So I don't think it's about making a stand. I mean, if you're referring to during Black Lives Matter, as you know that the BGT, which is a big show, it's 7-8 million audience. Ashley Banjo and Diversity did a very well choreographed, very well produced dance, and we got 24,000 complaints to Ofcom about allowing that to be broadcast, and we thought about that, and we thought, why? And what have we done? Why is this such a big thing? And I think it was because, everyone was talking about Black Lives Matter, and for some people, I think some people might have thought that was political, the dance, right? And it wasn't. It was choreographed, and we then just did an ad, which was just to say, we support the talent on this show to make their own judgments about this, and also to say, this whole thing about, if you see people, that's how change happens. Change happens through what you see on screen. Screen is a very powerful, emotive medium to change people's thinking and behavior. And that's what we were supporting diversity, because BGT is a very diverse show, and we were supporting that principle. And some people thought that was great and other people didn't. But the thing is, you have to use your judgment in an instance like that, and you have to support your talent. In an instance like that, you don't blindly support people. You have to use your judgment. And I was surprised actually at how many complaints Ofcom got. And I thought they were surprised, which is why they unusually announced what they thought. Where they said no rules had been broken and this was absolutely okay. I think they did that because it was so febrile. The social media was going mad.
The interesting thing is, I see Louise Jarvis responded. It kind of was political, she writes, but that's okay. And Steve Saunders wrote, and Ofcom issued a magnificent 2 fingers to all the complaints. I guess there are questions, though, aren't there, Karen, about the extent to which people want an entertainment space that's free from politics, but for precisely that reason, it's important that because it has such reach, it doesn't entirely shun those debates that really matter. And I wonder how you think about that in your conversations with Kevin Ligo, in your conversations with the creative teams, how much you push an agenda.
Well, I mean, I don't, I don't think we push, we don't push an agenda. I don't think we do. I mean, as I said, there will be campaigns that we run, which, we've done lots on kids and eating, healthy eating. We've done huge amounts of work on mental health, actually, with Calm, with Mind. We do a lot of campaigning. Some people might say that's political, some people, but actually that's part of our social purpose. And we believe that that's very important. I don't think we try and push agendas. Remember, we're highly regulated. Yes. I mean, we have to be very, very careful about what we do. And we have to, you could argue that we're not, that we can't achieve impartiality all the time, but we strive to have balance and impartiality. There is a big, profound debate to have about the difference between impartiality and balance and how you use both of them together. And I think the way you make interesting programs is by doing both, but having balance so that you have varied opinion and people don't come down on it and say, I don't agree with that, that's political, and that's this and that's that, because what some people think is political, other people think is their lives. So I think you have to, as someone who is reaching millions of people, be impartial, but also show other opinions and ensure there's balance on every program that you do.
I appreciate that. I mean, the one thing I think, for what it's worth, Carolyn, is that I think that there's an extent to which broadcasters get extremely inhibited by issues around impartiality. I think the distinction you make between purpose and politics is really helpful, actually. When you talk about purpose, people go, okay, well, I can see how you can get behind that. Politics and being political can be, or maybe should be, something different. Let me bring some other people. Debbie Mason wanted to get back to I think the point about digital transformation, your point about the AI team. Debbie, over to you.
Hi, Carolyn. Thank you this morning. I'm just intrigued. You say you've now built an advertised tech platform and have a team of data analysts. We know the world is becoming more and more analyst driven. So I'm wondering how far what they discover will impact your commissioning process, because clearly they're tracking audiences. They know the valuable audiences. You rely on your advertising as your bottom line. Every business is bottom line driven. So my question is, what impact and what power do they have upon your commissioners?
And I missed, you broke up a little bit, Debbie, so I'm sorry for this. What was the organization that you referred to? The
fact that you've created what is now a data analyst team with an advertising tech platform, understandably, because that's your revenue.
Yeah, I understand the question. Sorry.
Okay.
I heard every third word, so I was just trying to. No, don't worry. So we will use, as I said to you, look, you can have reams and reams and reams of data, but ultimately what you're trying to get is insight. This is not that, this is not worth a penny, that data, if you don't get insight from it. Now, remember, we're not really selling people's data in any way. We're not monetizing it in the way that, an Amazon or a Google or a Facebook would do, where they will sell packages of that data onto other parties. We don't do that. What we do is we allow advertisers to look at our first party data when they are targeting people. We also get permissions, obviously, because that is the code. We get permission from people to allow that to happen. So we're very careful about that on the advertising front. On the creative front, I'm a firm believer, and having worked in creative organizations like GMG, Guardian Media Group, as well as ITV, creative judgment and creative instinct will always take priority, actually, over sometimes what the data will tell you. Because many people don't know what they want to see. They can't predict what they exactly want. They might tell you that they love drama, but they won't tell you what precisely. They might say crime, but who would have ever thought that the Pembrokeshire murders, which is a very understated, very unsexy show, actually, right? And based on true stories, beautifully acted, brilliantly produced. But that got 10 to 11 million viewers. Now, I have to say that a lot of producers who do things like that don't ever know when that is going to happen. So creative judgment is a critical thing, which is why being a creative organization and fostering that and nurturing that is incredibly important to me at ITV. So it's using the insight that you get, not the data, but the insight, to try and inform at your judgments and your creative thinking, but not to lead it necessarily.
Debbie, thank you. Carolyn, can I just ask Annabelle Barrett? Annabelle Barrett's made this point about, picks up a little bit on your point about values and purpose, but not in terms of the leadership of an organization, but actually as consumers and how purpose can impact advertising. Annabelle, are you there?
Yeah, absolutely. I obviously, as you've referenced, there's so much ITV does in terms of social purpose, like Get Britain Talking. And I'd just love to know whether you see purposeful work like that, be it sort of in programs or above the line, whether you see that as eventually becoming a form of marketing as your audience comes to depend more on Gen Z as being a big proportion of the audience.
Well, it's a really interesting thing, because kind of when you talk about marketing, now remember, I've been in marketing. I don't know if you are, Annabelle, but I mean, I feel marketing can sometimes have a really kind of, it sounds a bit commercial. And so we don't really ever kind of, but actually what we're doing is communicating. So whether that's marketing or, doing it through an ad, doing it through a bumper, doing it through however we do it, we are communicating with our audience all the time. And I see that is very powerful. And so our social purpose, whether that's about climate action, whether that's about mental and physical well-being, whether that's about volunteering, getting people together to do things for the public good, all of those things are, we're going to continue to communicate that in any way we can, and we will sometimes be overt in that marketing. So you will have seen something about the vaccine, which we worked with Robin White at Engine, he's not at Engine anymore. Engine worked with him, plus a couple of other agencies, and he wanted to get this on air, and he wanted to get this, this is about getting Black and Asian and minority ethnic people to feel reassured about the vaccine, and it used a range of talent to do that. It was a really powerful little film, and it was brilliant. All the broadcasters came together and we put it out there. Now it was an ad, okay, really, but actually it looked like a film. So that marketing, and it was very powerful. It's worked very, very well. It's reached lots of people. So that ad is actually a very powerful piece of communication. So it doesn't really matter what it's called, in my view. I think our role is to communicate well, and particularly do that with our social purpose, so that because we can reach so many people and do so much good.
Is there, Annabelle, thank you. Is there obviously sometimes a tension between those two things, between the social purpose, Carolyn, and the kind of commercial interest? Before you joined ITV, there was a big battle around, fizzy drinks and, sugary drinks, and ITV was definitely seen as, on the side of obstruction in this, wanting to preserve that revenue, even while having an argument around obesity and health of children. So it sometimes does.
James, I think there's a really important point there, which is if there was tangible, hard evidence to say that TV advertising reduced obesity, right? If you banned it, it reduced obesity, then I think ITV, with its conscience and its purpose, would not make a case not to ban TV advertising of those products, HFSS, high fat, sugar and salt. The fact is, we don't make the products. The really big issue on obesity is not just the products themselves that are manufactured elsewhere, but also how they are sold, what price they're sold at. You take it away from advertising, it goes somewhere else. It's going to go into price. That's going to affect people who are perhaps less well off. And we know that we've done huge amounts of work on that. So I think this is an interesting lens, isn't it? You will see that as obstructive. We will say, actually, we have done a lot of work on it. And apparently, if you ban TV out, and it's going to happen, right? So it's going to happen. The government has announced this. So I'm just saying there are always different perspectives, and often they don't get heard. We are more powerful when we're trying to change behavior, and we will continue to do that regardless of the ad ban.
That's interesting. That's really, really interesting, Carolyn. That's really interesting. I'm going to come, if I might, will give the last word to my colleague Tess Murray, because she asked a question. Tess, you there? It was a question about sort of the nature of leadership as a CEO. Tess, over to you.
Yeah, I just had morning, and thanks so much for being with us. It's been great. I just had a couple of thoughts. One was, back in the day, and I'm quite old, being a CEO was looking after the balance sheet and keeping the shareholders happy. And frankly, you mainly got your weekends off. Now you've got to be everything to everyone. You've got to be a kind of spiritual leader internally. You've got to be political with a small p. You've got to lead values. You've got to, if you look at things like the Edelman Trust Barometer, the people, the most trusted entity in most people's lives is their employer. So you carry a lot of weight. And I just wondered how much of that you felt during the sort of span of your career had changed dramatically. Do you feel you need to bring more of yourself to the role? And the second question I had, just on this idea that ITV needs to lead and sort of, it's an important part of the social agenda. Are you kind of happy with the structure of your executive team? Because I see it's still very heavily male and white. And, do you feel that represents your audience? Do you think your audience needs to, is there a loop between your executive team and the audiences, and does that team need to look more like its audience?
So I'll just take the point you've made about diversity and the executive committee and the PLC board. Actually, there are 3 women on my management board, so my executive board, one of whom is Black. So it's actually about 28%, nearly 30% female, and that has changed since I've been there. On the PLC board, it's even higher. It's about 40. I think there are 4 or 5, certainly 40% of the PLC board, maybe even higher, 45% is female. And we have 2 people from diverse backgrounds on our PLC board. So actually, we are trying very, very hard to make sure that all the things we talk about in our social purpose, we act upon. It's a very important thing to me. I don't think we always get it right. I think we try very hard. And I don't ever want to give up trying. I think it's really easy, actually, when you're on an executive committee to just go, oh my God, we're going to get criticized whatever we do. And I'll give you an example of that. I put Ade Rawcliffe, who's a fantastically talented woman, on the executive committee. And she leads everything to do with diversity, inclusion, but lots of other social purpose initiatives as well. And I thought, well, I'm going to be accused of tokenism. And I thought, do you know what? Sod it. Because bluntly, I knew that having her in the room when we were making critical decisions for the company was going to be really, really significant. And it has been. And I think she would say that it has made a massive difference to the conversations that we have. So you can prevent yourself as CEO thinking, oh God, I'm going to be accused of this, I'm going to be accused of that. Actually, you have to ignore the noise, and you've just got to do what you think is right. And that is quite important. And that kind of goes to your first question, which is about how things have changed. I mean, I've been CEO now for over 20 years. And I was lucky that I was a CEO of The Guardian and The Observer. I learned an awful lot, I saw an awful lot, and it was a values-driven organization. And so the way I have led has always been about personal purpose and about company purpose. So I've always worked for organizations I feel I can make a difference to, and I feel I can, that the values are an important part of what they do. So I think what has changed is the scrutiny, the kind of constant being on because of social media. You're constantly on. I think that has definitely changed in the last 5 to 8 years, where you're never off. And that can bring with it some challenges, I think, for CEOs. Because I think, CEOs are human beings, and sometimes they want to be reactive, and that is usually a mistake, usually a mistake on social media. So I think it has changed, definitely. But I don't think how you lead necessarily changed. It's how you respond to the changes that are happening around you that changes.
Carolyn, thank you. And Tess, thank you for that question. I see amazingly we feel as though we've just got started and we've run out of time, Carolyn. I wanted to say thank you. There's something brilliant about being able to listen to you and understand that some of the choices you've made. I've come away having written, 4 notes to myself. One is just the urgency of trying to defend the digital public square, the idea of public service online, and for us as a newsroom to look more closely at what the government is doing, or more importantly, what it's not doing. I'm really struck by your point about purpose and how a broadcaster can have purpose without necessarily straying into politics, and how we think about that. I'm really struck, and I think lots of people will be, about this distinction between data and insight. Get the data, but then don't think that's the answer, find the insight. And your last point, never stop trying, is a really good note on which to end. I made one point to you, which I should have picked up earlier in the chat, which is Colin Duffy, who I read in the chat, was saying very kind and generous things about ITV Hub, but just saying, can we get subtitles? So he was saying it seems it's coming. Okay, good. All right. Well, I'm definitely glad to have raised this. But I just wanted to say a big thank you to you. I know that everyone is zoomed out at the moment, and so having an hour of your time on Zoom at the start of the day is really appreciated by everyone. Thank you, Tortoise members, for joining us. Thank you, Carolyn McCall. Have a very good day, everyone.